Hey guys, welcome out to Revolution this morning. We're going to do we're going to read through an article on the Johannine comma, which is on my website called johanninecomma.blogspot.com. If you actually go to johanninecomma.com, it'll redirect you to this page. And so this is an article about Georgios Babiniotis, and so Georgios, he has answered an email that I sent to him concerning 1 John 5:7. And so what I did is I started to get my head around the whole grammatical argument to do with the comma and the solecism that exists if the comma Johanneum is deleted from Scripture. And so obviously, I might actually just open a page here. We'll just go to my website, textusreceptus.com or tr.org.au. If you go there, it'll redirect you to this main page. And I just want to go to 1 John 5:7 here. And so we can see the main issue. 1 John 5:7, Johannine comma. Now, I've got a lot of information about 1 John 5:7 on my website, but this is the main crux of the argument. So here we have in Greek and in English. Now, the words in red are what are called the comma Johanneum, and so, or the Johannine comma. Now, these words are deleted in the modern versions. Now, why are they deleted? Well, most of the time, the critical text people will simply follow Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, even though they'll deny that to your face. When the rubber meets the road, that's what they will support. Now, if you look at the last 12 verses of Mark, we have 99.9% of all the manuscripts back up the Textus Receptus, the King James readings there. I'm pretty sure these stats are correct. There's 1,617 Greek manuscripts that have the last 12 verses of Mark in it. There's only two that don't, so that's Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. And so these two are the ones that people go to. These override the majority. They override everything else. And they'll delete 12 verses because of those two manuscripts. And so, but that's for a whole nother argument. But I just wanted to point out, if you said to a critical text person about 1 John 5:7, if you said, so how many Greek manuscripts would I need for you to consider that this is genuine? And so just say there's about 500 manuscripts of 1 John. If you said to them, and at the moment, everyone is in agreement that there's less than 10 manuscripts in the Greek tradition that have these words in it. And so for a Textus Receptus person, a King James person, we understand that this fell out of the traditional text, this in the Greek. Now, if you look at the Latin, 95% of the Latin has the comma Johanneum in it, in 1 John chapter 5. If we look at the early church writers, there is a mountain of quotations, and so that's what I'm going through in my videos. If you watch my previous videos, you can see. And many times people like Dan Wallace, Bruce Metzger, Bart Ehrman, James White, these people are fudging the figures to make it look like that this verse was simply not known. And so within Textus Receptus circles, we understand that the people who compiled the Textus Receptus, be that Erasmus or Stephanus or Theodore Beza or the King James Version translators who worked on their text and created the final definitive Textus Receptus, which is in the King James Version, we understand that there are three in the closed class of witnesses. And so we have the Greek, we have the Latin, and we also have the early church writings. And so they're within the closed class of witnesses. Now, we can look outside of that. We can look at versional evidence, say in Ethiopic or in Syriac or other different things. But within the closed class of witnesses, it's like a three-legged stool. And so we see in the Greek, usually the vast majority of the time, our argumentation is very strong in the Greek. Our defense for the Textus Receptus is usually always strong in the Greek. That's why historically the Textus Receptus was called the majority text. And that name became borrowed in the 1980s. They printed a text called the majority text. And that's why sometimes people say, oh, the King James is different to the majority text. Yeah, that's because it's a printed edition now. It used to be a name for the Textus Receptus. And so they've sort of mixed those words up and they've redefined terms. And so many times it's just a category error. James White says, oh, the King James isn't based on the majority text. Well, the Textus Receptus was a name for it, was the majority text. So just because someone years later printed something called the majority text doesn't mean they're the same thing. The Textus Receptus was also called the Greek Vulgate. It was called the Syriac text. I've actually got an interesting book here by Sturz. Now, in the introduction, he actually calls this text, obviously you got the Byzantine text or traditional text. And so Dean Burgon, he would have called it the traditional text. We also have the we have the Asiatic text, the Oriental text, the Constantinopolitan text. Westcott and Hall called it the Syrian text. And so it's like, just say I was to print a text tomorrow called the Syrian text. That doesn't mean that we back the King James up to that, because the terms have changed. Just like the Message Bible. If I was to say, okay, I'm preaching the message of the gospel. I agree with the message. The message is important. The message is the best thing in the world. But then, someone prints a thing called the Message Bible. It doesn't mean I'm talking about that. That's a different thing. And this is the category errors that we're dealing with. I think they're purposely confused, that people have purposely confused the majority text issue. But so if we look through these, everyone on each side of the fence, whether you're critical text, whether you're majority text, or whether you're Textus Receptus, King James, whatever part of this argument, whatever side of the fence you're sitting on, everyone knows that there's only about under 10 manuscripts in the Greek. So it's not strong in the Greek, but it's strong in the Latin and it's strong in the early church writings. And so what do we do in the Greek? Well, we obviously have lost the battle externally, because the external evidence in the Byzantine Empire basically omit the words that you're seeing in front of you. And so that's just a logical fact. That's something that we all agree on. So when we talk to critical text people or even majority text people, say like James Snap and others, why do they continually tell us that these words are missing in Greek when we agree with that? They just keep going, they're missing in Greek, they're missing in Greek, they're missing. And it's like, yeah, but obviously if we agree with that, why do you keep bringing that up? We agree with this, but we believe that there is internal evidence that we win this debate on. And so when we look at this internal evidence, what exactly are we looking for? Well, usually you would look for certain patterns, you would look for themes that are in Scripture in this chapter that appear later, so the witness of God or the witness of man, and so distinct, different testimonies, so two different types of witnesses. And so we see here there is the witness in heaven, and we see there is a witness in earth. And so this is the main crux, and I thought I'd just to quickly explain this before I read the article of Babiniotis, because some people that they don't understand this argument, and so basically we're saying if it was to do with the Latin, we would win 95%. You know, if we're going for a majority text head count, if it was to do with the early church writings, we would win. There are so many quotations of, you know, and these three are one, and talking in the context of Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and these three are one. And but when it comes to the Greek, we're like, okay, something's happened here, something's dropped out. Now, the good thing is, in Greek, you can tell by consulting experts in the language. I'm not just talking about experts in modern Greek, but experts in Koine Greek, experts in ancient Greek, experts in all styles of Greek, like Georgios Babiniotis is. He's thoroughly an expert in the Greek language. He writes etymology books, so the study of where these Greek words came from. He's written 6 dictionaries. Brilliant guy. And so the good thing is with Greek, we can see forensically how these words have been taken out. And so just like today, the science of um, uh, of criminology has advanced so much that you can get someone break into your house, and if they left muddy footprints through your hallway, they can tell, you know, how big, you know, obviously how big the shoe was, where the mud, they can do samples of where the mud came from. They can actually see how tall someone is by how far the steps are away from each other. They can tell if the person was walking injured. There's so much they can tell just from a footprint. And so what we see here is these words that are in red, that appear in the Textus Receptus, that appear in the Reformation text, and in the Latin and in early church writings. These words, they leave footprints. And so, and you can't get away from this type of analysis. And so just as much as a forensic scientist would look at a crime scene and see crumbs of information around the place, a piece of hair here and a piece of dirt here and certain other factors, that they can see, so they can see something that has been there and it's been removed. So we can see the footprints of this verse in the Greek text, even with these words taken out of it. And so this has been one of the main arguments since, well, it's been said that even Erasmus argued for this. It's been said that even before Eugenius Vulgaris. Now, I don't want to confuse you with who these people are. So what I'll do is I'll jump to my website and I'll just show you some pictures of who these people are, just so I'm not just saying words and you just think what on earth is he talking about, and it just becomes confusion for you. So I'm going to make this as simple as possible. Okay, so Eugenius Vulgaris. So here is a picture of Eugenius. Now, Eugenius was a brilliant guy, and he actually revived, he was one of the main founding leaders for the modern Greek language. And so he was one of the key figures in the development of the of a certain dialect in Greece. I won't try to say that Latinized word there. And so Vulgaris is the single most important figure in the grammatical discussion. So we're not talking about the manuscripts, because we recognize there that we only have a small percentage of manuscripts in the Greek. But one of the things is the main argument that critical text people have when they're talking to us about 1 John 5:7, it's like, well, it's not in the majority of Greek manuscripts, so why would you have it? And someone like James White would say, if that verse fell out, how can we trust any verse in the Bible? Well, how come they throw out the last 12 verses of Mark when it's in 99.9% of the manuscripts? So back to my story, if we were asking people, how many manuscripts do we have to have for it to be acceptable to you? So just say there's 500 Greek manuscripts of 1 John 5, and we're going through them. We're like, okay, that one doesn't have it, that one doesn't have it. So we understand that it's slim. But if I was to say to them, how many do I need? What, half? Like 250? They would say, no, that's not enough. If we go to 350, not enough. 450, not enough. 490, not enough. 495, not enough. 498, still not enough. So we can have 99.9% of the Greek manuscripts backing up this verse, and they still won't accept it because they go with whatever Vaticanus and Sinaiticus have. That's exactly what they do in the last 12 verses of Mark. So they're not really interested in the majority text. The vast majority of the time, the majority text argument for them fails. So what they're doing here is they understand that this is a rare occasion where the majority text doesn't agree with the Textus Receptus. The majority text is not agreeing with King James readings. And so they're flipping it around and using our usual argumentation against them. And they're saying, okay, it's not in the majority. But usually we have other things backing up, like the early church writers. Like we got 95% of the Latin. That should speak volumes. And what you find is there's a lot of inconsistency in this type of methodology. So say in 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16, the majority of manuscripts have that. And even James White in his book, he agrees with Textus Receptus people on that. He says that he agrees with Dean John William Bergen on that verse, where it says God was manifest in the flesh instead of who appeared in the body, which is ridiculous because it's a predicate without a subject. It's something that in sentence structure, it's ridiculous, and it's the greatest solecism in the Greek New Testament of the critical text. We don't have that solecism in the Textus Receptus. They have a massive solecism. Many people don't even realize what that is, but it's just very bad grammar. It's ridiculous grammar, or it's called a solecism for a reason. So a solecism in Greek means a grammatical blunder. And so, but in the Latin manuscripts, there was an error that crept in, and the word became who. And so this is in the Latin. So they don't follow the majority of Greek there. They follow the Latin. But even James White, he agrees with the Textus Receptus people here. But the people in Munster, the people who support the modern English versions, they support the modern critical texts. They're going against theos, and they're putting os there, not because of the Greek, but because of the Latin. So you can see this inconsistency that whenever they feel like it, they will say, oh, we have the majority there of Greek, we're going with it. Other times there's a majority of Greek there, and they go, well, we're going with the Latin there. And so they're jumping all over the place, but they're accusing us of inconsistency. And so this is one of the things where obviously they're dealing with 12 verses thrown straight in the bin, and we have 99.9% of the Greek manuscripts. We're just left there going, why on earth would you do that? And so, but I want to bring this back to Vulgaris. So Eugenius Vulgaris, and so in about 1780, he talked about the issue of a solecism. And so he says here, but in the original Greek itself, I'll make that a little bit bigger so you can see that. But in the original Greek itself, if the prior verse is not there, it obviously by no means can stand without some violence to the syntax and through a most obvious solecism. So this is someone who speaks Greek fluently. Most of these guys, Dan Wallace, James White, Bart Ehrman, Stephen Boyce, these guys can't speak Greek. When you ask them to say simple things in Greek, they don't understand them. When you get them to, if you say, what is man in Greek, they're like, oh, anthropos. They might be able to say a few definitions here and there, but to actually read through a Greek document and spot grammatical errors and um, to understand the syntax and the grammar of the Greek, they might be able to pass words, but that's quite easy if you've got lexical helps online. You've got interlinears, you've got all sorts of helps guiding you through this type of process. You can sort of do like a Google Translate type of thing and go through and piece together some things, but that doesn't mean that you're fluent in a language. We know that in English, we say things, we say idioms. I've probably said 10 idioms already, and I have no idea where they are. They're just part of our language. And so what we see is experts like Eugenius Vulgaris, he said there's this solecism. There is error if these words here are taken out. If these words are taken out, there is an error. Okay. And so I'm just going to go back to my page here. So this is what it looks like in the modern critical text. So all those words in red are taken out. And so when you just have that, what happens is, it says because this is worded in an interlinear style, so it's not how the King James reads, but it says because three they are, the witnesses, the spirit, the water, and the blood, and these three, for the purpose, one they are. And so we see that because of the masculine nature of 1 John 5:7, when we go back to our text here, because of the masculine nature of the Father and the Word, this actually regulates the below words when it talks about the water and the blood. And so we see it says the spirit, the water, and the blood. These become masculine because of the Father and the Word there. And so hopefully you can see that this type of information, I'm trying to make it as simple as possible without getting too complicated. But this is the type of information that's out there. So it's quite complex. So who do you go to? I've looked at Eugenius Vulgaris information. And so brilliant guy. And he's not just a standalone figure. He wrote this. People like Nittel, people like who else do we have? Well, pretty much most of the guys who are in these books here. Frederick Nolan, what have we got? Nittel, Burgess, Ben David. When you go through these books, the controversy of the comma in the 1800s was based around this grammatical argument. So this also became one of the main reasons why I'll just go back to 1.57 here, why the Greek Bible of 1904, which I'll just find here, the Antoniades 1904, 1912 Patriarchal Edition. And so it says the Greek Orthodox of Antoniades is in its original printing contained the comma Johanneum in small and italicized type. This would indicate its absence from modern Greek collections of Greek manuscripts of 1 John, so the same situation as the Textus Receptus in the King James. Antoniotis clearly explained the issue in his Greek preface. The passage on the three witnesses in 1 John 5, 7 and 8 did not appear possible to include this, either by the principles of this present official Orthodox edition or by way of exception, since it is entirely unattested in church texts, in the fathers and teachers of the Eastern Church, in the ancient versions, in other manuscripts of the Slavic version, or even in the Latin or any known Greek manuscript written independently of this edition, which was introduced gradually into the Vulgate. It is retained solely upon the opinion of the Holy Synod. So this is English translation by J.M. Rife in Colwell's Prolegomena of the Study of the Lectionary. So this is a common theme where people are saying that it's only just appeared in the 1904 edition. But notice here that's saying it's not in the Latin, but it's in 95% of the Latin. It's in the early church writings. And so many times this type of information is faulty. And if you go through and you check and fact check these things, you can find so many errors. And this is one of the things about 1 John 5, 7. There is layer upon layer upon layer of error. And even people who support the Textus Receptus, support the King James, many times they're repeating things because there's just so much misinformation. So they'll read through a bunch of stuff, they'll repeat something that some linguist has said, or they'll repeat something that is just not factual. And so why was it put in the 1904? I believe 100% that it's because of this guy, Eugenius Vulgaris. Eugenius Vulgaris pointed out that there is this solecism that appears there, that you can't actually have that verse removed without destroying the text. Okay, so this is the background. I'm just giving you some background of why I wrote to Georgios Babiniotis, okay, because you can see that this is quite complex, and there are a lot of Greek speaking people here in Australia who I could have contacted, and I probably will still contact different people. But there is a hole in the text, and so it's a bit like a black spot in a movie. You're going through a movie and there's 10 seconds of a black spot, and it's like, what was that? You know, if you're going through a song and there's just silence, and it might just still have the drum beat, but it's like there's something missing there. Something's gone wrong in the recording of this, in the transmission of the text. Something's happened here. So who do you contact? Okay, so introducing Georgios Babiniotis. Okay, so even Wikipedia, they have a good article about him. Now notice, he was born in 1939. He's been around for a long time, since the beginning of World War II. Georgios Babiniotis is a Greek linguist and philologist and former minister of education and religious affairs of Greece. So he knows scripture, he knows religious debates, he understands these things. He previously served as rector of Athens University. So we're not talking about Yale, we're not talking about Princeton, we're talking about Athens. So all day speaking Greek, grew up speaking Greek, read the Greek classics as a Greek person. As a linguist, he is best known as the author of the Dictionary of Modern Greek, which was published in 1998. So he's written 6 dictionaries. How many people do you know? Even someone who's written an English dictionary, you think, wow, they know this stuff. This guy has written dictionaries in Greek. He's a fluent Greek speaker. Born in Athens, 1939, he graduated from the 9th Boyce Gymnasium of Athens. Then he studied philology at the School of Philosophy of the University of Athens, 1962. And so I could read through all that, but you get the gist. This guy's very well educated, um, and scientific advisor for the Greek public television stations. He manages the Lexicography Center, which published the Dictionary of Modern Greek. I mean, you know, this is one of the world leading expert. He could be the leading world expert who's alive today in the Greek language. And, when I brought my information out, a lot of critical text people were like, who's this guy? And I was just like, okay. And then once they found out who he was, they're like, well, he just speaks modern Greek. What's the issue? And I'm like, when he was in Australia, he was talking about ancient Macedonian. But this guy is going through. He's not only gone through ancient Greek, Koine Greek, Attic Greek, every style of Greek, but he has written dictionaries. He's writing etymological books. He's written or been a part of 200 books on the Greek language, ranging from the alphabet all the way through to linguistics and syntax. And this guy knows the language. And this is one of the amazing things. You show critical text people who prefer the modern versions and the critical text, Nestle Aland, United Bible Society text, or Tyndale House, whichever one you want to jump to, and they look at it and go, who's this guy? Like straight away, aren't these guys supposed to be interested in the sciences? Aren't they supposed to be interested no matter where this information comes from? Now, I'm really sorry that it came from me, because I understand that you don't like me. I understand you think I'm a King James only, whatever you want to pigeonhole me as. But this information, surely this guy doesn't have a barrier to push. This guy is not King James only. It's almost like if this guy had read the King James and was a supporter of the King James, they would label him as like a Ruckmanite. It's just, that's how dumb these labels are that James White has. He has the 5 types of King James onlyists, ranging from someone who just likes the King James to right to Ruckman. But you're all King James only. So anyway, I put this information out into the world, which I'm about to read to you. And I was just faced with a whole bunch of people saying, you're an idiot. What would this guy know? Like, can you imagine if this happened in English? Okay. So say someone like David Crystal. Now, I've conversed with David Crystal. I mean, half of the good books that I have here, like, Dictionary of Language, it's David Crystal. He's brilliant. Now, I've likened Babiniotis to David Crystal in a sense where David Crystal's written over 100 books. He's an expert in the English language, and I really enjoy what he says. Many times, even what he says about the King James Bible, it's accurate. It's just to do with grammar, to do with linguistics, to do with definitions, to do with etymology. And when I wrote my first Easter article, he read through that and said it was good and accurate, and he gave me a few pointers because I was toying with the understanding of Easter, because in Tyndale it was Esther. It didn't have the A in it, like E-A-Ster. And so he was pointing me in a certain direction that helped me with that. But brilliant guy. And so imagine someone, say from India, they're like, I'm an English expert. I'm an expert in the English language. And then so we write to David Crystal about something, and he's like, who is David Crystal? Who is this guy? I don't trust him. Does he know anything about the Bible? Does he know anything about textual criticism? That's how dumb it seems. Like, people are looking at Georgios Babiniotis and just saying, who is this guy? And it's like, obviously, we understand this issue that these words have, for whatever reason, fallen out of the Greek. So there's 500 Greek manuscripts. It appears in less than 10, and many of those are in margins. So we've known that for forever. You know, TR King James people, we're not surprised when someone turns around and repeats that to us. It's like, yeah, okay. Why don't you just say it again? You already said it 500 times. Just say it one more time. You know, um, we understand that, but our argumentation is that this verse should be in there because it creates a solecism. It creates grammatical issues. So who do you go to? You go to someone like Georgios and you say, okay, Georgios, I want to know, is this true? What happened with Eugenius Vulgaris? Was he correct, or are we wrong here? So I'm approaching world-leading experts and saying to them, this is the issue that we have. And I said to him, is Eugenius Vulgaris correct in his understanding that there's a solecism here? That's what I asked him. Let's see what he said. So I'm going to read through this article now, and you'll understand all the background that I've just said to you. I've tried to make it as palatable for you as possible because I've been writing this stuff. I've been thinking about this stuff and also learning lots of information about this. And so sometimes I might say a word and you're like, what does that mean? And you know, and that took me, 3 months to get in my brain, and I'm just saying it. But I just wanted you to sort of come up to speed, and now I'll read this. Vulgaris vindicated by leading Greek expert. Most critical text proponents don't even engage in the grammatical issues surrounding the Johannine comma. And those who do, such as Barry Hofstede, it's a typo there, it should be 1F, I think, or James White, only reveal that they are not adequately informed about this issue. In an email discussion with Professor Georgios Babiniotis a few months ago, I asked him about the validity of the claims of legendary Professor Eugenius Vulgaris, this guy. Okay, so I'm contacting Georgios Babiniotis, and I'm saying, what about the claims of this guy, which was in 1780? And so, concerning the Johannine comma, so we're being very specific here. Those familiar with the grammatical arguments made by Vulgaris will be pleased to know that Babiniotis, who is probably one of the most important linguists alive today, said that not only was Vulgaris correct to say we need to keep the comma for grammatical reasons, and he also took it a step further by pointing out that verse 7 justifies verse 8 because of the syntactic parallelism of these two verses. Okay, so I'll just read through this again, just so you understand exactly what I'm saying. So for those familiar with the grammatical arguments made by Vulgaris, so there's a lot of people who are familiar with this, who study, the Textus Receptus, the King James, and they're involved with defending these things. Many people like Nittel, Burgess, was it Dabney? These people have been involved with talking about what Vulgaris has said. So they will be pleased to know that Babiniotis, who is probably one of the most important Greek linguists alive today, said that not only was Vulgaris correct, so this guy, he was absolutely correct. That's what he says. Not only was he correct to say we need to keep the comma for grammatical reasons, and he also took it should be but there, he also took it a step further by pointing out that verse 7 justifies verse 8 because of the syntactic parallelism of these two verses. So what they're saying here, or what I'm saying in my introduction, is that not only are these words the grammatical reason, not only is the grammatical reason enough to show us that this verse should be in there, but there is also a syntactic parallelism. So what is that? What's a syntactic parallel? I'm just going to read a basic definition. So in rhetoric, parallel syntax, also known as parallel construction and parallelism, is a rhetorical device that consists of repetition among adjacent sentences or clauses. The repeated sentences or clauses provides emphasis to a center theme or idea the author is trying to convey. And so in English, usually we talk about this type of parallel in sentences, in phrases and clauses and things like that. So we might have, I had a dream that all men were created equal. I had a dream, so this type of thing is there's a parallel. Many times it can be in poetry, it can be in hymns and verses and things like that. Um, and so even in, say, sentence construction, basic sentence construction, because it's talking about syntax here. And so, but in Greek, it's talking about the parallel verses, where in English, usually we talk about this type of syntax being within sentences. But a sentence is just a group of words that make sense. And so clauses and phrases, they make sense, but they don't make complete sense. So a clause is a group of words that has a finite verb, but is only part of a sentence. And so we do not know where they have laid him. And so it's part of a sentence. So that's the clause, but the phrase is a group of words without a finite verb, like under the fig tree. And so these have to work in tandem. And so they have to work together to create a proper sentence, to create good grammar. So we have the subject and predicate. So we understand that in 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16, where we have a predicate without a subject. And that's the reason why it's the greatest grammatical blunder in the critical text, because they have to believe that Paul broke out into a song in the middle of what he was saying. So he just started singing. He said, "Great is the mystery of godliness." And then the music started and someone got the guitar out and they started saying, "Who appeared in a body, and they started singing. That's what Hort said. He invented that story, and that was enough to get rid of God was manifest in the flesh, to put who appeared in a body. But to get that, to have a predicate without a subject, it totally destroys the grammar. Okay. So you have subject and predicate. Every sentence has two parts. You have the subject and you have the predicate. So it's pretty basic stuff. This is basic grammar. The subject names the person or the thing uppermost in the mind when the sentence is formed, and the predicate makes an assertion about the subject. So you might have the subject I and the predicate die. So it's quite simple. Jesus wept. The glorious gospel, the subject, talking about the gospel, the predicate is sent out into all the world. So I'm just sort of giving you a bit of an understanding of how sentences are structured, that you have to have these two things working together to create a full functioning sentence. And so, but what Georgios Babiniotis is talking about goes beyond that. And so I'm still actually trying to work through a lot of those issues, going through parallel syntax in the Greek, in Scripture, and also trying to make sure that I'm not putting English definitions onto Greek concepts. But there's quite a few books out there, studies in biblical parallelism. That's one book that I'm going through at the moment. This Justor article, Grammatical Aspects of Biblical Parallelism. So I'm going through that at the moment, but I don't want to bore you with all that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep reading through, but I just wanted you to get a bit of a taste of a parallel, but also Maybe I should read a few examples, or maybe not. I'll just keep reading through this, and maybe what I'll do, we can chat about this in the comment section. We can bring up other things, and then obviously with every single one of these videos on 1 John 5:7, I'm making room for video number 2, video number 3, video number 4, and hopefully we can do 10 videos on this, and at the end we have so much information that it's like its own playlist. It's a bit of a library of information, and we can go through that. And so let me just continue. Babiniotis is a Greek linguist and philologist who has written several books about Greek grammar, etymology. So etymology is the study. Just put the fan on here. It's getting quite hot here in Australia. Greek grammar, etymology, and other Greek language-related topics. He is the former Minister of Education and Religious Affairs of Greece and previously served as rector of Athens University. As David Crystal is to English-speaking people, so Georgios Babiniotis is to the Greek speaker. Here are some of the books he has written here. So I was sharing this with critical text guys, and they just had really no interest. They're like, who is this guy? What? He did a modern Greek dictionary. Oh, that's stupid, So there you go. I'm sure that the critical text guys can jump on here and read all that Greek. Read those things. But luckily, you can just jump onto the English here. Let's make that a little bit bigger and just see what he's making. Okay. The bitter truce of my language, talking about Greek. The language issue, contemporary approaches. And so we're looking at a 619-page book, 176 pages, meditations on language and our language, simple language and linguistics lessons, from cosmogony to linguistics, vocabulary enrichment, a brief history of the Greek language with an introduction to historical comparative linguistics. This is the book. Look, he's the main guy with these books. Okay, so I know it might seem a bit weird that I have to go through and build up his credentials, but it's like, just because the critical text guys were like, who is this guy? They just wrote him off straight away. He agrees with King James only, people. Write him off. It's like, it's just so bizarre. Text communication, how we write, how we understand the text, theoretical linguistics, like books on linguistics, not just books about, how to count to 10 and, Dan Wallace, he misses a whole bunch of really good idioms and stuff and just can't see it. Christians and Greek spirituality, talking about, the Bible and things like that. Language as a value. The example of Greek studies and lectures. Look, 1978 to 1993. Old, long time ago. Before half of these guys are even born. Like, education, training, language, Greek language. I think you're getting the point, but I just wanted to show you linguistic schools, European and American structure, the art of speech, introduction to semantics, history of grammar of ancient Greek Latin. But I thought Georgios Babiniotis, he's just a modern Greek speaker. I know I seem like I'm condescending and mocking, but if you'd seen the comments from people like Barry Hofstetter, from people like Elijah Hickson, they're just, who is this guy? And I'm like, okay, like, how can you not respect what he's saying? Look, these are essays. Okay, so essays till today, or dictionaries. Let's just look at the dictionaries that he's got. Okay, there you go. He's written dictionaries like this with his name right on the front, like Georgios Babiniotis. I mean, most of the people who I'm talking with in the critical text camp couldn't even read his name properly. They couldn't even read that bit properly. And so, yeah, if you go through that website, there's just so much information. It's like, man, this guy is just absolutely legendary. And so anyway, I'll continue on. I could gladfully and gleefully go through those things just to show you, how educated Georgios Babiniotis is, and how people like James White and what's his name, Grantley MacDonald, these guys, like, compared to this guy, these if I was to compare it, like, this guy would be out of 100, like 98% out of 100, where someone like James White would be like 1%, 2%. Probably like Stephen Boyce would be like 0.1. And here's this legend linguist. And when I asked James White and Stephen Boyce, when they were doing a whole video on the Textus Receptus, I asked them about Georgios Babiniotis and his claims about the grammar, and they just dismissed it, said it wasn't true. Okay, so I guess he's just lying. It's like, oh my God, just unbelievable. Okay. Babiniotis is a Greek linguist, philologist, and has written several books about Greek grammar, etymology, and other Greek language-related topics. He is the former Minister of Education and Religious Affairs of Greece and previously served as rector of Athens University. As David Crystal is to the English-speaking people, so Georgios Babiniotis is to the Greek speaker. Here are some of the books that he has written here. Not all 200, but quite a lot of them. You may know of Babiniotis from his Greek dictionary, which is often simply called Babiniotis Dictionary. In May, he wrote the following and attached a Word document. So this is in his email. In his email, he wrote, "Dear Mr. Sayers, I apologize that only now I can answer your kind letter about the New Testament passage discussed by Eugenius Vulgaris. Here is my opinion as a linguist, not an expert in theology." But really, have we talked about the theology of 1 John 5:7? Have we talked about the Trinity? Have we talked about anything like that? Not really. We're talking about grammatical issues here. And so he's saying, okay, this is my opinion as a linguist. He has the right to be called a Greek linguist. And he's saying, not as an expert in theology, even though he was the Minister of Religious Affairs in Greece. It's like, you have to know a fair bit about theology. He's written books about theology and linguistics and things like that. But he's saying, I'm not an expert. I'm not as much of it. Yeah, he probably would be an expert, but he's not giving his opinion on that. Okay, so there's Georgios Babiniotis. Now, how many of these critical text guys could even look at that and say his last name there? Yeah. Anyway, I'll try not to laugh too hard on these guys, because I got told the other day that I'm really arrogant. So, okay. They thought David was arrogant too. When he went to kill Goliath, his brothers were like, "You've just come here to see the battle. Who are you? You're prideful," and all this sort of stuff. Sometimes humility can get mistaken for arrogance, and I'm sorry if I'm rubbing it in. Just the critical text guys, I'm rubbing this in their face, just going, read this. It's because, well, what else can I say? This guy's in agreement with us. He said to me, "I will not discuss the opinion of the really great theologist and scholar, yet not a linguist, Bishop Eugenius Vulgaris, as I do not know on what conditions it was formulated." So there can be a whole bunch of, he didn't read the whole, paper. It's probably like 500 pages or whatever. He didn't read the whole thing and get the whole context of everything, but, he got the gist of the argument. And he's saying, Eugenius Vulgaris, he is firstly a theologian. And so notice the humility here. He's, imagine if these critical text guys were as humble as Georgios Babiniotis. He's like, I'm not a theologian, but he's the head of the religious affairs in Athens. Wouldn't you say you're a theologian? It's like, and he's saying here humbly that Vulgaris, so just to let you know that's this guy, that your Vulgaris firstly was a theologian, and secondly, he was an expert in grammatical issues. But look, it says here he was a Greek linguist who was one of the key figures in the development of certain dialects of Greek. So obviously he was a linguist. But what Babiniotis is saying here is that that's not his forte. His forte is theology. Okay. But he's saying, okay, I know theology, but I'm an expert linguist. So I'll give you my linguistic understanding here. However, linguistically, though with other explanation, Eugenius Vulgaris is right to consider 5.7 or the Johanneum obligatory for the existence of 5.8. Okay, so here we have a guy who's written all these dictionaries. He knows the history of words, etymology, legendary, absolutely legendary. Here's his biography if you want to, go through all that and, all the things, academic career, all the things that he's done, scientific activity, conferences that he's done, a conference on Macedonian studies. That's the one I was talking about in Melbourne. Amazing guy, absolutely legendary. And he's replying to me in English. This guy's a polyglot. He knows French, he knows German, he knows a lot of languages. He is saying it is right to consider verse 7 obligatory for the existence of verse 8. So he's saying that these words here, the Spirit, the water, and the blood, and these three agree with in one. If you don't have these words here, these words can't exist because of the way that the Greek language is inflected. Now, there's a lot of inflected languages in the world, like say Russian. In the Greek language, it makes a difference on the ending of words. So basically, you have the core word, but the way that it ends, if you have say an omega at the end of a word, usually that means I. So agapeo, I love. So we know agape is love. Agape o, so it's almost backwards. We would put the I first, but they put it last. It means I love. And so it's an inflected language. And so sometimes this shows us, a word that is masculine or feminine or neuter or plural. We have dogs, for plural and things like that. Let me continue. What you are asking has two aspects, a theological and a linguistic one. Okay. I can only say my own opinion on the linguistic aspect. So he's just saying, let's just lay everything aside. Let's just look at the linguistics of this. On the linguistic aspect of the specific text within the frame of what is quite often used in regard to the Greek language and passages of New Testament Greek. So let me just repeat that again. What you're asking has two aspects, a theological and a linguistic one. I can only say my own opinion on the linguistic aspect of the specific text within the frame of what is quite often used in regard to the Greek language and passages of New Testament Greek. So he's saying he's not doing anything different than if he was looking at John 3:16 or any other verse. This is how, if you were to look linguistically, not theologically, just linguistically at this verse. This is how he would tackle it. The use of the masculine gender and not neuter on verse 5:8. Chapter 5, verse 8. Qui tres esin hoi maturiontes entega. To pneuma, qui to uda, qui to aima, qui ho tres estu en esin. And so we look at the words boldened here. I'm going to enlarge in this so you can see it nice and big. I'm just going to check where my head is. Okay, it's down the bottom there. So it's got the three here, maturiontes, the witnesses, and hot tres, and these three, or the three of these. And so it has tres estin, homaturiontes, and tega. So there are three that bear record on earth. The spirit, the pneuma, the water, uda, and the blood, haima. And these three are one. So listen to what he says here. These is linguistically justified. So the use of masculine gender is linguistically justified on the pattern of syntactic parallelism. That is, on the ground, i.e. just means id est, that is, on the ground that it makes a pattern completely the same, parallel in structure of that of 5:7. So it's got exactly the same parallel. So we're seeing the fingerprints, they match up. And so many times you talk to a critical text person, they say that this verse started off with Cyprian saying, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, as it is written of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and these three are one. That might have ended up in a footnote somewhere. And then someone said, oh, the Father, Word, and the Holy Spirit, and these three are one. And then it sort of morphed and it became this big footnote, and then it ended up in the actual text. And the rest is history. It ended up in the Latin. And in the Greek, a few smatterings here and there ended up there. But instead of it being original, it fell out of the Greek. They're saying, no, it was invented in the Latin. This is part of what Dan Wallace says and a bunch of other guys. But what's amazing is there is a solecism in this passage, a Greek grammatical error in this passage that just so happens to be fixed by this bizarre footnote. And so this footnote that apparently, was written, Cyprian, he's just written a bit here and there, and it's been added to, and eventually it's become this sort of thing, and then they slip it into the text, and lo and behold, then when you read through that chapter, there's no more solecism, there's no more Greek grammatical errors, and it just so happens to be an exact parallel of chapter 5, verse 8. And so here we're reading chapter 5, verse 8, where it says three witnesses and these three. And so this is a type of structure that he's looking at here in verse 7, where it says hote, tres estin oimeturiontes en tu uranu. So that's in heaven. Ho pater, ho logos, kai tu agion pneuma. The Father, the Word, and the Holy Spirit. Kaioti, oitres en esi. And these three are one. So he's looking at these three here. This, and this. He's saying that pattern is in there. And when you go to the verse before it, that same pattern is in there. And he's saying that is a syntactic parallelism. And he said it's completely the same parallel in structure as chapter 5, verse 7. And so it's very difficult to do that, except in poetry. You've sort of got someone saying, think of any song. I'm just trying to think of a song where they repeat something over and over. It shouldn't be hard. Maybe a modern day worship song. Um, like Jesus, we love you. Jesus, we praise you. Jesus, we worship you. Jesus, we. It's got a very similar pattern, but because this pattern is stretched out over the verse, it's um, it's even more complicated because it's not just repeating something. It is the structure of the whole entire thing. So I'll just keep reading because he does explain this. So for modern linguistic analysis, what is important is not the mere grammatical agreement rule, which would lead to the usage of neuter gender, um, qui tria esse ta maturionta en tegar. So what he's saying there is these words here would be they would be neuter and not masculine, because we see in verse 8 that it's tris maturiontis, and so it's uh, tria ta maturionta, and so that's how it should be. So what he's saying is this is how it should read in the critical text. If we were to only just have the critical text, this example here, instead of it should have tria maturionta instead of tries and maturiontes, and so uh, it has no reason to be like that. So that grammatical error, that's there. So he's saying, so for modern linguistic analysis, what is important is not the mere grammatical gender agreement rule, which would lead to the usage of neuter gender, and then he's got them highlighted, but the overwhelming schema of syntactic parallelism, which is much more stronger than a simple gender agreement rule. And so what he's saying, the gender agreement rule is true, and that's where a lot of people go. They're saying, this is an obvious solecism, but he's saying this is way more important, is that there is a syntactic parallelism that you can't deny is in these verses. One can't exist without the other. This parallel is very distinct. And in conclusion, he says, the issue we refer to has more to do with the linguistic style of the passage. It is a result of a stylistic selection, which is far beyond the usage of a grammatical, syntactical rule that would lead to neuter gender, and which furthermore would eliminate chapter 5, verse 7. And so not only is he in agreement with 1 John 5:7 being there because of these grammatical rules, he's saying the overall style of these sentences is also another great evidence to prove that chapter 5 verse 8 can't exist without verse 7. And so George, so we just kept chatting about this. George said in a later email to me, I have given you my own linguistic explanation, which is to keep chapter 5 verse 7, which justifies verse 8. It is grammatical and mainly syntactic parallelism in these two verses. And so then I write, I hereby challenge those of the Anglo-Sanhedrin, the English religious leaders of the day, who desire to delete the comma, such as James White, Dan Wallace, Barry Hofstadter, James Snap Jr., Stephen Boyce, Bill Brown, Bart Ehrman, Elijah Hickson, etc., to refute the claims of this top Greek linguist, who has basically just confirmed that the Greek grammatical argumentation that myself, Nick Sayers, Stephen Avery, Will Kinney, Edward Hill, I should say Hills there, Jack Mormon, and many other KJV KJV people hold to, is not is not only correct, but that the comma is also linguistically justified on the pattern of syntactic parallelism. Okay, so that's the article. Hopefully you understood what I'm trying to say there, because I don't want it to go over everyone's head. Now, I challenge you to, if you are in disagreement with this, I challenge you to send this to any linguist. I challenge you to send it to any critical text person. So what do you think about this video? These guys have a really strong argument for 1 John 5:7. They have a strong argument that even though in the Greek manuscripts it's very slim, there is evidence there. There is forensic linguistic evidence that it should be there because of the grammatical argument, but also because of the syntactic parallelism that Georgios Babiniotis is talking about. And so I'll just go through some of Stephen Avery's comments. So when I first put the information up there, so Stephen Avery has said, this is a wonderful note. Notice a deep respect for the historic world-class Greek scholar Eugenius Vulgaris. So that's true, that he had deep respect for this guy. And so Stephen is often on forums and writing things. He's prolific in writing about this information. And so me and Stephen, we're very good. What would you call us? We're very good at tag teaming with some of this information. And, and I would say he's a friend, online. I would say that, just like, I interviewed Bible Protector just a while back, and, we know where we don't see eye to eye, and we're like, okay, well, we don't see eye to eye on this thing and that thing, but there are a lot of things where we do see eye to eye. And when we're actually working on similar things, like even with Revelation chapter 16, verse 5, Stephen Avery sort of jumped in and threw a bunch of things out just recently that were really helpful. And I'm like, wow, this is really good. And so a lot of people, they don't like Stephen. I know that sometimes the people on the forums, like Tapper Talk forums, Bill Brown, these guys can just be so toxic. I call them the Sopranos of text criticism. They're like, you walk into their little club and they're just like, who is this illiterate, babbling, King James only Ruckmanite fool who, and it's like, I'm just saying hello, it's like, I'm not a Nazi, and they try to get me, this is a side note, they try to get me on King James Version only, saying that I am a King James Version only, and I've just got to admit it. I was like, so you guys like black people? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, well, so you guys are BLM? And they're like, no, that's a Marxist thing. That tag has a whole bunch of baggage, and I won't be called BLM. I'm like, well, you're calling me King James only, which has all this other baggage. Isn't that the same thing? And they're sort of like, the conversation just stopped because they sort of walked right into it. I was quite surprised. Anyway, it might limit Georgios. Hey, hang on, I'll read it from the top. It has been a wild ride watching the Contras jump from one false argument to another fake argument and using obviously irrelevant analogy verses, even Hofstadter, who should have known better, always sneering. It might limit Georgios Babiniotis to use the David Crystal comparison. While Crystal is a wonderful academic and has even been of help on AV issues, my understanding is that Babiniotis is a central figure in Greek language and culture. Personally, I've talked of this parallelism for years, how the two verses are one grammatical unit. It is nice to see a high-level explanation and vindication. This is one of the things. This has been said for years. This is one of the main arguments for 1 John 5:7. So how come if I jump onto a Facebook forum or any type of forum talking about 1 John 5:7, and I say, okay, what about this and that? People go, it doesn't appear in the majority of Greek manuscripts. Why do they just keep going to that? Why don't they deal with what we're saying here? At least Hofstadter has attempted to, even though he's failed, at least he attempted to answer that. And at least, people like James Wyatt and Stephen Boyce, they must have Googled it the night before. They're like, oh, we go with him, And, James Snap and, obviously these guys aren't of, they wouldn't even scratch the surface of the knowledge of Georgios Babiniotis. But at least they're trying to address that. Where most people are, they're not, they don't even want to go there. And these guys are sort of addressing that because many times they've been cornered and they have to deal with this issue. And then these guys are saying that it's not an issue. Legendary linguist Georgios Babiniotis is saying it is an issue. Who are you going to believe? You don't have to believe me. I'm saying, look at Georgios Babiniotis. Look at what he said. Read what he said. These aren't my words. I didn't plant something in his mind. I didn't say I'd give you money to say this. I asked him simple questions about Eugenius Vulgaris. He agreed with him, and he added his own linguistic understanding. Personally, I've talked about the parallelism for years. So there's a vindication for Stephen Avery. People need to note that and say Stephen Avery's been talking about this for years. When Frederick Nolan used the phrase figure attraction, referencing the Port Royal grammar, the sense was meant to be similar, but the term itself was not so clear. It has always been clear that the two verses in parallel act as one grammatical unit. Thus, the short text is a bold solecism, and the majestic, full heavenly and earthly witnesses is majestic, strong, and true. Kudos to Nick Sayers for making the connection with George Babiniotis, and I'm really glad I did. And I feel privileged to have brought this information out, because it seems like this information gets brought out in most generations. Like Hills talks about it. Many people actually talk about this, and it's quite interesting. You go into it, and it's like, how come no one's talking about this openly? How come none of the Anglo-Sanhedrin, how come they're not bringing out good argumentation against Babiniotis? Because they can't. How can you argue against this guy? Okay, so it's mirrored there. A whole bunch of research on the topic. And so, yeah, I would recommend anyone go to Stephen Avery's Pure Bible Forum and look at this. And so we had a Facebook discussion on it, and many people coming against us, so you can read that. And it's good that Stephen Avery documents a lot of this stuff, which is really helpful. Okay. So there's a guy called George Panayotou, and he says, I fully agree. See, this is a Greek-speaking guy, native Greek. I fully agree with the view expressed by Professor Georgios Babiniotis that the stylistic and structural device of syntactic parallelism argues convincingly and irrefutably in favour of the authenticity of the Johanneum comma 1 John 5:7. So, I mean, Greeks can see this. People who understand and know. Greeks haven't been reading the Bible in Swahili for the last 2,000 years. They've been reading the Bible in Greek. The morphology of Greek is similar today to what it was 2,000 years ago. The difference has been explained in, like, we read the King James, like that type of literature to today. It's still readable, but you might have to look up a few things. There might be some grammar that it seems a little bit backwards to us, but it's still readable. And so I think that, who was it? Dane Johansen, Taylor De Soto, and Stephen Anderson, they thoroughly disproved that whole concept that modern Greek is so far detached from Koine Greek in their video when they went over to Cyprus. So that's quite an interesting video there. So Vulgaris, Vindicated. Okay, so these are just constant links. So I won't read through everything here because I actually don't know a lot of what it's saying, but I should really go through it. But it's quite interesting. Gregory Nazianzen, he actually said there was a grammatical error. And so we're looking at about 380 AD. He said there was a grammatical error. And so I've heard some people say, see, he was fine with the grammatical error being there. And it's like, he mentions that it is a grammatical error. Regardless of whether he was fine with it or not, that's not the point. The point is that there is an error there. And so, anyway, I recommend anyone to jump onto this page and have a good look through. And yeah, Taylor de Soto, he's basically read the article, and that is here. He read the article, 1 John 5:7 is authentic, proved by legendary Greek grammarian. So that was on June the 3rd, 2021. So I recommend you go through that. It only goes for 12 minutes, and he reads through the article and gives quite a few good pointers. I recommend that you subscribe to him. I'm subscribed to him. What we really need to do, guys, I mean, if you look, he's got 511 subscribers. We really need to push. If you're for what I'm saying, if you're for what Taylor's saying, anyone else in this group of people who are just trying to defend the TR KJV, subscribe, like, or go through and like all our videos. You know, put the information in places where people can see it. You know, do all that sort of stuff. I know, you know, I hate it when people are like subscribe and all, you know, flashing bells and all that. But what I'm saying, it's very important that you do this for us, because many times people will type in 1 John 5:7 and they'll get Dan Wallace, and they just click on it, watch it, and go, oh, that's pretty dumb. Why are King James people so dumb? But if this article, either by Taylor or this video I'm doing now, is first, that changes the whole atmosphere. That changes the discussion. People go through and go, wow, there's a whole bunch of stuff I wasn't shown by James White, by you know, Bart Ehrman, by a whole bunch of other people talking about this issue, and I'm going to research that, and then that can be a doorway for people to know the truth about Scripture and to come back to the Scriptures. That's been, you know, we've had the Scriptures stable in print form in English for 400 years. In the Textus Receptus has been, you know, many years before that, in the Byzantine tradition, in manuscripts. You know, what we see is the TR, the received text. This needs to be revived in these last days. One of the reasons why we're seeing so many people depart from the faith, depart from logic, depart from you know, having one singular truth, is because of these issues. People are like, oh, you can delete that verse and throw that verse in the bin, and you know, many of the Trinitarian doctrines, many verses about the deity of Christ have been attacked. And so we've got to be aware of that. So I'm just wondering if there's anything else I need to say. Just quickly go through. Not really. And so hopefully you understood everything I was saying there. And what I might just quickly do, I'll just have a look and see if anyone is commenting. Where are we? Okay, YouTube, we are live there. Okay, so we have Sean at Cheatham. Hey, Sean. Oh, I'm echoing. It is amazing how many disputed have grammatical issues. God gave us what we need to identify His word in every age, even if the manuscripts don't always agree. And that's the thing about the Greek language. It's so amazing that if it wasn't an inflected language, we probably wouldn't spot these things, but it's clearly an inflected language. In disputed texts where there's issues, and the thing is, even someone like Dan Wallace, like he made the statement, he said, if we were to see in the preamble to the Constitution of the United States, we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect onion, straight away you go, that doesn't make any sense. It should be union. And we would know instinctively that it should be union. And that's the thing. When Greek people are reading through their text, they see that type of thing everywhere. Where, for the Anglo-Sanhedrin, they know how to define a word, and they know that a lexical word would fit in here, but not understanding the contextual definition of words and the way that context shows certain verses that might even be, you'll have a verse and five verses later, there's something that mirrors that verse. And seeing these type of patterns in the Greek language is just amazing. And people who speak fluent Greek, people who read fluent Greek, people who understand the scriptures, they see this everywhere. And so obviously someone who, with the lexical ability of Georgios Babiniotis, he can see this just like we're seeing a basic error of, an apple or a apple. We look through and we go, okay, well that's wrong. They see these things. They can see the grammatical issue of the neuter of the masculine, and also the syntactic parallelism. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video. I encourage you to comment. If you disagree with what I'm saying, please write below. If you think I needed to say something and I didn't, or if I've said something that's wrong, I encourage you to write to me. I want to be corrected. I'm not just standing on my soapbox and just venting. I want truth, and I want the word of God to be known. And so, if I'm arguing from a place of error or anything like that, I'm open to your correction, to you pointing out where I'm wrong, where you think Georgios is wrong. And thanks for your support and your encouragement to guys who faithfully do watch these videos. Share this. And so, like I was saying before, jump on Jeff Riddle's channel, subscribe to that, like his videos, share them around on Facebook, on a whole bunch of pages. Do the same with Taylor DeSoto. Do the same with my video. Let's elevate this issue. Let's elevate these arguments. I want to do a whole bunch of debates. I'm challenging people everywhere to debates, and I'm not getting any bites because I think people are seeing this type of argumentation and they can't argue against it. They know that they are not qualified to argue against this type of information, and it will just make them look foolish if they try to do so. So anyway, guys, God bless you. Thanks for listening to me this morning, and we will see you another time.